You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and federally certified veteran-owned small business. I'm your host, Robert Bain, along with our producer, Chris Spangle. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact us at chris@leadersandlegends.net. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Like always, we love having historians on the podcast. This is actually his second visit. He came, one of the very first podcasts we ever did was a tribute to the life of Birch Bayh, who my mother thought walked on water, holding hands with Andy Jacobs. And it was Nancy Pappas and Louis Mahern and Bob Blaemire. But we've had him back on, very generously reached out. He has a new book, Unforced Errors, 15 Bad Decisions That Changed American History. It's available, I assume, Amazon?
It will be if it's not. It's supposed to be now, but it hasn't happened yet. So it will be shortly. Technically, the publication date was Friday the 12th, and they're trying to figure out what has happened, why it isn't there. It's going to be there soon.
His book unites the parties because when you grab a copy, both Evan Bayh and Mitch Daniels say it's a wonderful read. Is that fair?
It is. Yes, I'm proud of that.
Bob, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Robert.
Now, before we get started, I'm going to give you a chance to refute. Wasn't that long ago that I saw this guy named Bill Morrow, and he couldn't believe that I was having you on my podcast. He goes, I understand you've got Morrow coming, or you've got Blaemire coming on your podcast. He said it in a way that was just, sort of astonishing. Like, so I just thought I'd give you a chance to.
Well, I have his car right now, so I might be a little more reckless driving back. No, he's a very dear friend. He and his wife Ann, both worked in the Birch Bayh Senate office when I was there, and have been friends since the beginning. So it's a long, good friendship. That's who I'm staying with right now while I'm in town.
I tell people all the time, and we're obviously going to get to your book in a second, that the best friendships, it's shocking how many great friendships you can make via politics, regardless of party, RD, RRDD, doesn't matter, but you stick with them for decades.
Well, you know what how I've described that in the past? I was giving a speech of tribute to my father at a Marine reunion. My father had been a Marine in the South Pacific, and the last year of his life, they hosted the reunion in his home area. And I gave the speech. And what I likened it to is that politics it's like warfare in a lot of ways. You're in a foxhole with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And let me get rid of that.
That's Morrow texting you saying, don't wreck my damn car.
It probably is. And in many ways, you serve in a highly tense, stressful, and you feel significant environment with a very short timetable. I mean, one thing about this country is we know when our elections are, and they're not moving, and they can't be rearranged. They are when they're going to be, and you have to get X amount of stuff done in that time. You come out of that and you feel like you've been in the foxhole with somebody, and it does create a bond. The relationship, with Birch Bayh is an example, or my relationship with Evan Bayh. I mean, I've known Evan Bayh since he was 12 years old.
Well, but think about it, in the same, not to strain the analogy, but, one of the things that people forget about in politics, perhaps, or in policy, winning matters. Like, you fight your tail off to win, however that's defined, a victory in a bill or a passage of a bill, or, how hard did Birch Bayh work to get Title IX or presidential succession or the constitutional amendment for 18-year-olds to vote? These victories are important. So yeah, the blood may be metaphorical, but it's still there.
You sense it's a big deal that you're involved in. I remember when I was very young, I was 19, 20 years old, when he got involved opposing Nixon nominees to the Supreme Court, Haynsworth and Carswell. And the attention, all of a sudden, the national attention everywhere just elevated your feelings about how important, what a big deal this was. And when he and I traveled throughout Indiana for the 1974 reelection campaign, when he defeated Richard Lugar, who was then mayor of Indianapolis, I cannot describe to you how great election night was. The winning.
Yeah.
I never had a clue how exhilarating it would be for this incredible effort to be capped with a victory. So, yes, winning.
And that was a super close election, even though it was the Watergate year and Republicans got thumped across the country.
Yes.
The Lugar race was much closer.
Richard Lugar was a substantial character to be running against. And it was the level of satisfaction, though, in winning that thing was off the charts.
Let's talk just a little bit about where you're from. You're from Indiana. Talk about how you got involved in politics.
Well, I grew up in Hammond, Indiana. My father was a firefighter, had been a Marine in the South Pacific, and both my parents are from Hammond. And I have 3 siblings, and I decided when I was a kid I wanted to be president of the United States. And when I went through I've joked with my sons often about my college search. Nobody in my family had gone to college. We didn't know anything about colleges. And my mother and I went and visited a lawyer friend of hers, and he started talking about colleges, and he mentioned George Washington University is 3 blocks from the White House. I said, I want to go there. And that was the end of my college search. I got into George Washington and went there. And my first day after my parents left me off in Washington, I took a bus down to Capitol Hill to offer my 18 years of life experience to the junior senator from Indiana. I had never seen a senator before in my life at that point. I was able to meet him that first day, told him I wanted to work for him. He spun me off to a staff guy who took whatever information I could have given him. I can't even remember that because in the dorm, we had a phone booth, pay phone in the lobby or in the hallway, and I must have gotten the number or something. But anyway, eventually called me to ask me to come in on weekends to work on a project they were doing that actually was geared toward the 1968 reelection campaign. And once I got my foot in the door, I'd never left.
Who was the guy who hired you?
A guy named John Dibble was the staff guy who they were actually working on a project to take vote totals, put them in these forms to develop a computerized targeting program for 68 that ended up being an enormous waste of money. Didn't work. It was the infancy of computers and politics.
In Indiana in 68 obviously went for Nixon.
Huge.
Yeah. Who did you beat in 68?
Ruckelshaus.
William Ruckelshaus.
Yes. I mean, Birchby has substantial opponents to run against. 18-year incumbent Homer Capehart. Then William Ruckelshaus. Then Richard Lugar. And then Dan Quayle, who I think Dan Quayle was the least of the 4, but it was the worst year.
It was the worst year. Yeah. That's right. And Miles ran a hell of a campaign.
Oh, yeah, but 12 Democratic senators lost.
Yeah. Frank Church, a whole bunch of them got. That was a bad year.
Magnuson. It was a wipeout.
Ruckelshaus survived the 68 campaign. He did not survive the Saturday Night Massacre.
He did not.
And so your book.
And Ruckelshaus and Lugar and By all died within a matter of weeks of each other.
Yeah.
Which was just eerie for me.
I'd love to have talked to Ruckelshaus. I didn't really have the podcast up and running then, but it would have been so fun. Dwight Chapin, who was, Dwight Chapin?
I know who he is.
He came on the podcast to discuss his book about Nixon. It was terrific. That's the fun thing, to get to talk to folks like you. Like, what was it like in the room when?
Dwight Chapin had a very similar experience with Nixon that I had with Birch, traveling with him, being his bodyguard.
Yeah.
No, that's why I knew who Dwight Chapin was, because I'm thinking if Birch had been elected president, I would have had a very similar experience.
How involved were you when Birchby ran for president in 76?
My job was Indiana. I was sent out here to get him on the ballot in Indiana. We were hoping in 76 that we could get a confrontation with George Wallace. George Wallace had done so well here in both 68 and 72 that we felt that nobody else in the Democratic Party would probably take on Birch for the primary in May of 1976, but Wallace probably would. And if we could get a head-to-head, maybe a nationally televised debate, for instance, he could become the Wallace killer, which might escalate
instead
him
of Arthur Bremer.
Instead of Arthur Bremer, yeah. I guess it's a bad choice of words. We didn't want to kill him.
Point taken.
Yeah, that was the thinking. And so I was going through the process to get the petitions put together and signed so he would be on the ballot when he lost in Massachusetts and dropped out of the race. So it was very sad that I didn't travel with him in that. I wanted to travel with him in that.
Were you one of the people who said, Jimmy who?
Yeah, I was not a Jimmy Carter fan, you might say. I thought, not only that, I read a lot of things he had written that it never struck me as true. Like when he said, I'll read every letter that's ever sent to the White House and I'll sign every letter. And I thought, if that's how if you're telling the truth, that's a bad judgment and way to spend your time. But I'm thinking this is not real. And I remember Birch calling me in December of 75 when he'd just gotten started. And that was one of the problems. We got started way too late.
Mm-hmm.
The 74 campaign was grueling, and it took a long time to get physically back in shape. And so he's in Iowa. And I remember we had a program called the Indiana Hoosier Travelers, send volunteers to Iowa and New Hampshire. Evan was actually one of them, to work for free on our behalf. And I was running that. Shouldn't admit it, but out of the Senate office. and it was late one night. He calls me to ask me how many people were going to be coming to Iowa that week. And I'll never forget, he said to me, Bobby, every place I go, that Dad, Jimmy Carter's been there 4 times ahead of me.
Yeah.
And we still didn't think Carter would win. But he'd been out there a whole year.
Yeah, because he stopped being governor, 74?
Yeah. And he spent all of 75 into the caucus season in Iowa. That was, in fact, I interviewed for the Birch Pie book, David Rubenstein, who's a very large, philanthropist, was on our staff.
May I say, he is a guest on this podcast.
Is he? Yeah, David's
He wrote a book about presidential
yes, he did.
discussions. Yeah, he was so kind.
In fact, when I talked with David, he said to me one day, I didn't know you were so interested in history. And I said, I didn't know you were so interested in history.
I didn't know he was a billionaire owner of the Baltimore Orioles.
I do know that.
Someone sent me his book thing and said, you should talk to this guy on your podcast. And like the night before, I thought, well, let me read. I read the book, which was wonderful.
It is good.
And I talked to him. Anyway, the night before I talked to him, I'm like, let me research a little bit about this guy. And I got about 10 seconds into it, and I just was like,
amazing story, right?
Amazing story. But he was part of the Kenneth Carter administration, among other things.
He was the chief counsel of the Senate Subcommittee on Constitutional Amendments that Birch was a chair of. And when Birch got out of the presidential race, David, we all knew, was committed to work for president. And that's why he joined the Bai staff. He thought Bai was going to be the president. And as soon as we lost, we had a bunch of staff people left at that time. Mm-hmm. He went over to the Carter campaign. And when I interviewed him in 2015 for the book, he told me about that experience. And he said the entire campaign was about Iowa. Nothing else was going on. If it wasn't about Iowa, you had nothing to do. And it was all about Iowa. And of course, it proved successful.
Well, let's get on to, I need to email Mr. Rubenstein because I was watching for the 827th time the Heart rendition of Stairway to Heaven when Led Zeppelin gets inaugurated or gets inducted or whatever, the Kennedy Center Honors, the Kennedy Center Honors. Sitting right next to Robert Plant is David Rubenstein, who at the time I didn't know.
Yeah,
it was him.
Well, he's gone from the Kennedy Center now because our current administration wouldn't like David Rubenstein being connected
there. And Mr. Rubenstein received the Presidential Medal of Freedom before President Biden left office. Yeah. Amazing fellow. You wrote a book. It's Unforced Errors, 15 Bad Decisions That Changed American History. I want to talk about the honorable mentions first. In other words, what was the delta between, okay, this will make the cut and this one won't?
Boy, that's hard to describe because I think I told you that when I first started charting out this idea, I came up with 25. I've been a reader of presidential biographies all my life. And I think that was what really trained me to do the Birch Pie book, to write biographies. So I'm very comfortable with biographies. And I came up with 25 bad decisions. And my friend Ted Widmer, actually another author, said to me, that's too many. Narrow it down to 15. And I thought, well, that was good judgment. So I started making cuts, and some of them were like choosing among your children. The Kennedy Bay of Pigs decision, for instance, would have been a good one. Lincoln choosing Andrew Johnson for vice president, a hugely bad decision. It wasn't really his so much.
It wasn't his so much,
but
yeah,
it was still, right. he had to sign off on it, obviously. So there are a lot. I toyed a lot with the writing of a chapter instead about Biden choosing to run for second term. And then not only was the book pretty much done, I felt that maybe that's really not history yet. It's really almost still current, too recent. So I decided against doing that. That maybe that was not a good decision. I don't know. I came, like I said, there are a lot of more bad decisions than I was expecting to come up with.
Is it a matter of so many things that we think, and this is our lives? May I call you a political hack?
Sure.
Our lives as political hacks. So many things look good on paper. How do you, as a historian, because you are, as a historian, you're like, and someone who's been in the room, like, man, on paper, this was a great idea. And then the execution.
How did it go south?
Exactly right. Is that something you took into account?
I'm not sure. The first thing I try to do is define what should qualify. I didn't want to make simple decisions like Kennedy's agreeing to go to Dallas.
Sure.
Because that's the scheduling. That's not a seriously considered strategic decision. That's what I was looking for.
I mean, he obviously went there because Johnson said, look, we got some problems down there.
If he hadn't gone to that particular site.
Exactly.
So that wasn't a big decision by him. Lincoln going to Ford's Theater. Divorces that have changed certain, like Rockefeller's candidacy in 1964 was damaged by him getting a divorce. These are not what I considered serious strategic decisions. And I kept asking myself, well, why was it made? Why was it bad in my judgment? And what is the legacy of the person that decided it? How did it affect that person's history? So I tried to ask myself those questions each time I entered into one of these. I had a lot of fun with the Thomas Platt chapter. I don't know if you
on Teddy Roosevelt.
Most people don't know who Thomas Platt was. He was the Republican leader in New York at the turn of the 20th century. And he needed to embrace Theodore Roosevelt as a candidate for governor because he didn't want him to run as an independent. He wanted to be, Platt was the head of the Republican Party. He was a senator before they were elected by popular vote. And he wanted Roosevelt to be in the tent instead of outside the tent.
Sure.
And then he hated everything Roosevelt wanted to do as governor. We started reforming things, and all the big business supporters that were Platts were reeling over these Teddy Roosevelt reforms. And so Platt engineered the movement of Roosevelt to the vice presidential ticket with McKinley because the vice presidency was then considered the graveyard of politicians. Yeah. No vice presidents since Martin Van Buren had been elected. Yeah. And within a year of becoming vice president, Theodore Roosevelt becomes president with the assassination of President McKinley. So I thought, from Platt's standpoint, that was really a bad decision. I enjoyed the whole idea of that.
We'll get back to that one because I know that's one of your favorites. Did you ever consider writing a book, 15 Great Decisions That Changed American History, or are you about to make a sequel?
I'm not right now anyway. I feel there's a lot of books out there about great decisions or parts of biographies. I mean, I mentioned to you earlier that one of my favorites here is about the FDR's internment of Japanese Americans. I so admire Franklin Roosevelt and so many things he did, a lot of great decisions. The Japanese internment thing was awful. And so I right away was intrigued. How did this come about? How did he sign off on this and go along with it? And it became a fascinating, sort of study to go through the documents and the research that I could do to find out how this came about.
Now, you're a long time Democratic, I'll be nice, Democratic political operative.
I'm proud of it.
I've done my share on the GOP side.
Yeah, you bumped your head at some point earlier in life.
When you were writing your book, because I'm going to be a complete partisan dick, I went and if these are all Republicans making bad decisions, he's not coming on my podcast.
Oh, they're not, though. You know that. I made a point of that, by the way.
That's my question. Yes. Did you go, Jesus, I got Hoover and Coolidge and Nixon and Eisenhower and Bush
and LBJ and Al Gore.
And so did you sit there and go, okay, look, I'm not going to tailor it one way or the other. The decisions are the decisions, but I can't just have 15 bad Republican or Democrat decisions.
I did think of that. Yeah, I'll give you a similar example. After the Bayh book, because of Bayh-Dole legislation that he sponsored that has changed all of our lives. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Google as a company, for instance, got created under the new rules set up by Dole. I got asked by the Dole Institute at the University of Kansas to become a fellow and to teach this program in the semester the spring of 2022. I would go to Lawrence every week and sit on the stage with a guest, bring a guest. And we put together a program called Giants of the Senate. And I made a concerted effort to make sure there were Republicans and Democrats, men and women. And so I was really happy with that balance, because that's the way it should be in politics, by the way.
And we can all nitpick the other side, but as I sit down with my friends, whether it's Ed Tracy or Joel Miller or Kip Two or whomever, from the other side, Elise Schrock, and they're like, "You got all these Democrat friends," and I just chuckle. I'm like, I only hang out with people who hate their party as much as I hate mine. You're loyal to it, and you realize that the good comes with the bad, but you have to realize like your party screws up a lot, and to be so blindly loyal as to eschew friendships or partnerships with the other side is shocking.
Well, I was raised in a very non-political family. I couldn't tell you until many years later, when I actually interviewed my parents on videotape, how they had voted. I had no idea. I just know I was enamored with candidate for President Kennedy when I was 11 years old.
I was going to say, is that your first political memory, the 60 election?
Yeah.
Kennedy-Nixon?
Yeah. And
you remember Eisenhower as president.
Well, yeah, sure. And, I remember I think we first visited the Washington, D.C. as a family on a camping trip when Eisenhower was president. And I remember thinking, here he is behind this big structure in here, and this is pretty cool.
And it's Eisenhower.
And it's Eisenhower, who had this massive reputation. But the Kennedy candidacy was so attractive to me. I didn't have any political philosophy. I was a kid.
Sure.
I liked the celebrity of it. I mean, when I came to Washington, very frankly, if I had stopped in another senator's office and had a job opportunity, I'd have grabbed right at it. I got very lucky that I chose not only a great legislator, but a great person.
And I want to get to the book, and unfortunately, I have you
That's
here,
right.
so now I'm milking you till you moo about all these other things. But it's been 45 years since Birch Bayh lost to Dan Quayle.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
I remember it. I know you do.
I remember it a little bit.
And when Evan Bayh came on the podcast, Jim Shell and I got a chance. We interviewed him, and I remember, and I told Senator Bayh, I remember my mother crying when your mother died, when Marvella died. Birch Bayh is one of the most consequential public officials in the history of Indiana, is certainly one of the most consequential senators of the 20th century. And over time, I hate to say forget he was here, but, that's kind of how it is with politicians. Is that tough for you and all the people, who worked for him? Is like,
yes.
Look, Lugar's wonderful and we all love Lugar, and, you name other people, but let's not forget about this guy.
Yes. When I first started talking to friends about writing his biography, I'll never forget a friend of mine said to me, "Why in the world would you want to write a biography of Birch Bayh? Nobody knows who Birch Bayh is." This is a friend of mine in Washington. And I thought about it for a while, and first I reacted badly, but I thought about it and said, what politicians do we remember if they weren't president or the nominee for president? We don't. When I think of some of the giants that I saw in those days, Mike Mansfield. How many people knew Mike Mansfield was, of Senator of Montana, who was the majority leader when I was working there?
My mother was left of Khrushchev, but you know who she adored? Everett Dirksen.
Oh, Everett
Republican
Dirksen,
from Illinois.
And people probably don't remember him anymore. And it's just amazing. So I had to accept that perspective. That's just the way it is. We forget. We pay attention to the biggest names at the time, and maybe not even later. And so I started thinking, is this a crazy idea? And then I said, history is not just made up of the stories of kings and emperors and presidents. It's all its component parts. And I thought Birch played a large enough component part in the history of this country, particularly the history of the 60s and 70s.
60s, yeah, 70s.
To chronicle that story. Not only that, for me, it was a labor of love.
Yeah.
And he was, he'd read the first draft of the book before he died, which pleased me no end, because I was really worried that I wouldn't finish it before he died.
Let's get to the presidents. You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. We are with Robert Blaemire.
Neither a leader or a legend.
I think that's what Moreau was trying to get across.
Yeah, I'm sure he was.
We are discussing his new book, it's just out, Unforced Errors, 15 Bad Decisions That Changed American History. We're going to go chronological, but skip the 3 that we talked about via email so we can focus on those. The first one you have is John Adams, the Alien and Sedition Act, which has gotten more nefarious over time.
Yeah, well, John Adams had this enormous reputation and career in democracy of the small d and the rights that we enjoy today and the rights embedded in the Constitution. And for him to support and sign off and enforce the Alien and Sedition Acts, which jailed people for criticizing him, was really hard to accept. And it's something I think, going back to my very early readings of history, always bothered me. And so rereading it and going back, and particularly the McCullough book, biography of John Adams, you realize all these historians over the years have talked about what a terrible decision it was.
Well, and of the Alien and Sedition Act, the sedition part was particularly bad.
Yeah.
As opposed to, the Alien wasn't wonderful, but the Sedition Act is the one that makes people sort of get the vapors. Now, why was this act enacted?
There was a lot of sensitivity about, first of all, the newspaper was a lot harsher and more scurrilous then than they are now. And the things that were being written about him got under his skin in an enormous way. And, it was like...
Which wasn't hard to do.
No, but he was a very crotchety guy, but a giant. And even Abigail, who was probably a better politician than he was in a lot of ways, she felt the same way. She was all for stopping these people from saying these incredibly nasty things about her husband and her sons and everything else. And so I thought this was a terrible thing for his legacy.
Now we're going to jump from John Adams to his son, John Quincy Adams, who I think, in terms of pure intelligence,
oh my God,
is the smartest president we've ever had. John
probably
Quincy
the best
Adams.
Resume.
He could read and write Latin and Greek at 3.
Yeah.
For 4 years old.
He traveled to Europe before he was 8, I think.
Yeah. Minister, his dad was then he ended up being minister to St. Petersburg in Russia for a while.
Yeah, he was there, and he was in different countries, the Netherlands and England, France. And John Quincy Adams just had this enormous background and history. He was probably more capable and qualified than anybody at that point.
Not more than my man, Andrew Jackson.
A very different man, but there was his decision to cut a deal with Henry Clay, which Andrew Jackson labeled the corrupt bargain. It cast a pall over his first term and prevented him from having a second term.
So John Quincy Adams runs for president in 1824. There's 4 people in the race. It's Adams, the son of John Adams. It's John Quincy Adams. It's Andrew Jackson, the hero of New Orleans. And I should admit, my son, his name is Andrew Jackson Vane because he's my favorite president. Henry Clay and a guy named William Crawford.
Right.
And nobody gets the majority that you need to be elected president. It's thrown into the House of Representatives. Clay, who had run for president, I think as Speaker of the House, and engineers this result.
His support for Adams tipped the tide, and he became Secretary of State.
Even though Jackson had more electoral votes and more popular votes than Adams because of the corrupt bargain. And I've had lots of historians on, and we talk about the corrupt bargain.
It was the first time that we had a president that won with fewer popular votes.
But of all the people in the early republic to do something like this too, they chose the wrong one in Andrew Jackson.
Yes, they did.
Who then spent 4 years running for what he would call re-election, but 4 years running for president, and did the corrupt.
He may have been the first person also to publicly recommend getting rid of the Electoral College.
And he's one who used newspapers. They created a whole swath of newspapers throughout the country just to support him. But it really did. Now, whether there was a corrupt bargain or just a bargain, because John Quincy Adams wins, Clay becomes Secretary of State. That's the quid pro quo. Let's just say there was no corrupt bargain. It just happened the way it happened. But Quincy Adams never got past it, his presidency.
No. And he distinguished himself more later when he got elected to the House of Representatives and became the leading voice in the country against slavery.
But that sort of horse trading, which happens today, but it was much more prevalent back then because, things were so much more opaque.
You're right. He did it against the wrong guy. I mean, yeah. I mean, here's a guy who killed people in duels, and in fact, I could have included Andrew Jackson in the Trail of Tears as one of the bad decisions as well. They're like I said, they come up they pop into my head periodically, different ones. But I thought the corrupt bargain, it cast a pall on his presidency. It kept him from being elected the second time, and that's good enough to say it was a bad decision.
Yeah, it was 1-on-1 against Jackson in 28, and
right.
Adams got thumped. So I'm going to poke a few of these just to ask you quick and not dwell. I thought the Trail of Tears was going to be on here, so I'm surprised it wasn't. Thomas Jefferson and the Embargo Act, I thought was going to be here because of what it did. James Madison, the War of 1812, White House got burnt. But this is part of your whole, the Capitol, the whole.
Like I said, there were 25.
You have to get rid of so many. But there's a lot. Like, we had this run of presidents that just were awful. Taylor, Fillmore.
That's right.
Pierce, Buchanan, until we get to Lincoln in
Jackson
1860.
and Lincoln.
Yeah. Even though I guess you could give Polk some credit, depending on your view of the Mexican War.
I side with Lincoln on that one. And his opposition to the Mexican War.
Which spot did it take place? But I was interested to find out in that run of terrible presidents from like the early 1850s to 1840s, 50s through the 1860 election of Lincoln, you don't have anything there. And I just thought that was interesting because it was such a perilous time for the country as we tried to figure out slavery and bring in states in the Union and that sort of thing. Was there anything in particular that struck you as like, what, that should be in there, but I'm running out of spots?
To say they're bad presidents is an easy thing to agree to, but was there a decision that stuck out? There weren't any decisions that stuck out at me. Buchanan's behavior in many ways prepared us for Civil War. It created the tide that became the Civil War in a lot of ways. But was there a decision that jumped out that was a bad decision? I didn't have one in my head.
It was just 4 years.
A lot of incompetence, basically. Yeah. He was a Northerner who was in favor of, he liked slavery okay. And he wanted to protect the slave powers of the South. Franklin Pierce's presidency was pretty much destroyed by the accident that took place on the way to Washington when his son was killed.
Yeah.
That's a big burden to have. William Henry Harrison, I almost included him, even though it was not a big decision, the idea of speaking for
3 hours.
For 3 hours in the cold weather without a coat and then riding on a stallion and catching pneumonia and dying in a month. That's some pretty bad decisions.
The other one, and it's not a decision he made as president, but when people say who's the worst ex-president, and a lot of times it came up because they were lauding Jimmy Carter as the best ex-president.
John Tyler
joining the Confederate House of Representatives, I think, is unbeatable. When
Millard Fillmore was the know-nothings later on. They're not all sterling.
Let's talk
Americans.
About someone here. Let me ask you a question. Obviously, everyone pretty much agrees that Lincoln was our greatest president.
I certainly
He's
feel
either
that
first
way.
99 out of 100 or...
Yeah.
What was the worst decision Lincoln made? Well, it's not in the book, but...
I think it would be Andrew Johnson. I think the idea that... Andrew Johnson was a disaster as president, and he set us on the wrong path in Reconstruction, and he fought it all the way. He was nearly impeached, as you know. He failed conviction by one vote. I think that... it was a bad decision. It reminded me a little bit of the sort of almost cavalier way Harry Truman became nominated for vice president, where FDR wasn't engaged in that too much. And it was a bad process, but it turned out to be a good decision for the country. I think Truman, history is looking pretty favorably at Truman now. Lincoln's choices, some of the generals, even though I think a lot of them are easy to understand why, because he had so many good reasons to get rid of McClellan and kept not doing it or brought him back after it. And a lot of that was because he didn't know who else.
Yeah, that was the problem.
Yeah. So, Lincoln wasn't perfect either, but by and large,
He did okay.
Unbelievably great decisions.
Yeah. Teddy Roosevelt made 2 bad decisions.
Yeah.
Term limits.
Well,
in 1912.
He announced after he won a term in his own right that he would not run again. And his wife visibly blanched when he said it. And it's clearly something he'd been thinking about. And Doris Kearns Goodwin and others have written about whether he was felt that way because he didn't think he would outlive the years that when his father had died, or that he felt that because he had served most of McKinley's term, this new term would be the 2-term limit, and we should honor that tradition that Washington had established. It's hard to know because he spent the rest of his career trying to undo that promise, which showed it was a bad decision on his part. He probably loved being president as much as anybody ever loved being president. I think
him and Bill Clinton would be the two.
I was just going to say that maybe Bill Clinton is a close second. Teddy Roosevelt, first of all, he hated to be called Teddy. Theodore Roosevelt loved being president, and he changed the country in many, many ways. But he was also mercurial. He was also self-absorbed in a lot of ways, and he felt, the second bad decision to him was when he decided to go after Taft and run as a third-party candidate. What has become known as the Bull Moose Party, and as a result, destroyed the Progressive Republican Party, which was not his intent. And he later talked about that it was not his intent.
1912, they split the Republican vote. Taft is the incumbent who had been vice president. No, that's not right. What was he?
He was Secretary of Commerce I forget. He was on the cabinet. He was not vice president. He was best friends. They were best political friends. He and Taft. Roosevelt loved Taft. He used to talk about how he loved him. And then, he engineered his movement to the Republican nomination to succeed him.
Who the hell did Roosevelt run with in 4? Spangle? 1904, who was Roosevelt's running mate?
I don't remember either.
I can't remember
but,
either.
So when you think about it, I mean, one hard thing to believe is when we look back at the 1912 election, the president of the United States came in third.
That's right.
This is unbelievable. Charles Fairbanks
from Indiana.
Yeah.
Jeez, Bob.
Yeah, well,
that's a bad slip on our part.
No. Can I name all the vice presidents? No.
We can name the 6 who are from Indiana.
I can name a few of them from Indiana. Certainly Quayle, Pence, Fairbanks.
Keep going.
I'm done.
Marshall.
Okay.
Schuyler Colfax.
Yeah, that's right. Schuyler Colfax. Wasn't Marshall the one who talked about what we need? This country needs is a good 5-cent cigar.
5-cent cigar. And then there's one more. And I
remember Birch was once asked that. He said, a famous Hoosier once said, what this country needs is a good 5-cent cigar. And Birch responded by saying, what this country needs is a good $5 bag of groceries. At the time,
that mattered.
Yeah. But Teddy Roosevelt, his running and splitting the party the way he did, and in effect electing Woodrow Wilson was something that in his legacy was a bad decision.
Because Wilson and Roosevelt did not dance.
Oh, my God, no.
Wilson wouldn't let Roosevelt go to combat. Roosevelt was trying to recruit that, clearly with an eye on 1920.
I'm being a hero.
Yeah, but, in 1916, not Fairbanks, Charles Evans Hughes almost beat Wilson. I mean, Wilson won 2 squeakers for sure. The next one you have is Woodrow Wilson, the League of Nations. Now, why was the League itself a bad idea, or Wilson's attempts to get us in the League a bad idea?
The way he refused to compromise at all on the ratification of the Versailles Treaties, which included the League of Nations. Henry Cabot Lodge, one of Theodore Roosevelt's best political friends, was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that he would have cooperated if Wilson was willing to talk amendments and changes. Wilson hated Lodge. Wilson felt that he was 100% right and that the country would be behind him. So he went on this barnstorming tour to sell the Versailles Treaty and the League of Nations to the country, had a stroke on the tour that ended his presidency, basically, and ended the treaty as well. So you have to say that his effort to get this ratified and not to compromise was a really bad decision from his standpoint.
It changed, by the way, without Spangle's help. It's Hendricks. Thomas Hendricks is the sixth Republican.
You're better.
Thank you for always being at the ready, our crack research staff.
You're better at it than I am. If you quiz me on vice presidents, I might fall woefully short.
Wilson is one of those figures, and when I've had presidential historians on, or just kind of like political folks, it's really amazing how much Wilson's reputation has sunk.
Yes.
In the past couple of decades. Now, a lot of that is that he was, if not the worst racist ever to be president, damn close. But
he wouldn't be the worst pre-Civil War.
I wasn't counting the slave owners, but yeah. But Wilson was always esteemed as a top 5 president and the Federal Reserve Board and all these other things.
Well, we won World War I when he was president. Mm-hmm. That always is a big factor. But the reality is history looks back now, is he segregated. He enforced segregation within the government. His writings, his speeches, there is so much racist stuff in it. When he was going through the negotiations for the Versailles Treaty, he made extra efforts to keep some of the black nations out of the process and to discriminate against. I mean, he was a racist, flat out racist. What was the first movie ever shown in the White House?
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation, which was incredibly racist. He brought in, and so that has some symbolic value, I guess. So I felt that that again, that's not a bad decision. That's a sort of a bad philosophy. But I felt that his decision to pursue the Versailles Treaty the way he did and its ratification and its lack of compromise, ending up in causing a debilitating stroke, was a really bad decision from his standpoint.
Now, I've got two podcasts coming up on this. Lyndon Johnson, Quagmire.
Well, you're skipping over the Kennedy-Nixon debates, right?
Yeah, because that's one of the 3 we'll discuss at the end.
Okay. The Quagmire, I have to tell you, there's so much great stuff to read about what Johnson went through in the whole process of expanding the war and trying to keep what he was doing from the American public and feeling like he had no choice. Doris Kearns Goodwin, who offers some of the best evidence. I mean, not only did she work with him to write his memoirs, which never happened, but she wrote her own book about that period, and that he was tortured by what he felt he had to do in Vietnam. And yet he was daily besieged with body counts and the TV views of the body bags. And he knew what it was doing to his great society, which was his baby, which is he wanted. I remember my interviews with Birch Bayh about that. He was very close to LBJ. And he said to me, I think history would judge him among the greatest if it weren't for Vietnam.
There's a new biography of Robert McNamara, and the authors are coming on the podcast. The book just got released. You should get it. It's very, very, very good. And it talks about all of that. Johnson, you're right. Politically, he couldn't figure it out, which is shocking because his political skills were so amazing.
Absolutely. And everybody who writes, all of his biographers talk about this as a man who, in the legislative process, always knew where to go, where he was going to end up, where he needed to end up. In Vietnam, he had no idea. He kind of always felt he could cut a deal with Ho Chi Minh like he did with Richard Russell.
That's right. Let me build some bridges and other things, and everything will be fine.
And we have the reputation in our country of we're the ones that won World War II. Yeah. And what's this little pissant country in Asia is going to beat the United States of America? That was like an unacceptable thought.
But in July of 1965, they knew they couldn't win. That comes out in every book I've read.
And they kept expanding it.
Yeah.
And what it caused is the country's economy was awful. The number of people who died was obviously the worst part of it. I mean, the number of Vietnamese that died. We're talking about 1 million people probably that died in the course of that war.
All right, the next one makes my heart hurt. Richard Nixon burned the tapes. Now, are you advocating for President Nixon to burn the tapes?
I think it's very clear that nothing worse would have happened to him had he burnt the tapes. Let me put it this way. The worst thing that could have happened to him happened to him. He was driven from office.
And you were in D.C. during this time.
I sure was.
Tell me about that. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, when it was announced that Birch Bayh was on the enemies list, it was one of those halcyon days in the Senate office. We thought that was pretty great. It was difficult because Birch had opposed Haynesworth and Carswell, two nominees to the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Country had never turned down two in a row, and Birch successfully led the opposition to both, and he got on Nixon's enemies list. And we felt that the imperial presidency that Nixon was pushing, which by today's standards was amateur hour, impoundment of funds and starting a war with Cambodia. When we were he always had a secret plan to end the Vietnamese War, and we still don't know it. There was just a lot of things that we didn't like about Nixon. I will never forget the Saturday Night Massacre.
October of 1973.
Yeah, and Birch was flying in from overseas when it happened, and he said it was the only time in his life he felt maybe he might be met by the military and taken away. That was that kind of tension going on. I was called that night by our chief of staff and asked me, said, "Do you still have library privileges at GW?" And I said, "I do." He said, "Go in the morning and get anything you can get on the Andrew Johnson impeachment and bring it to the office. We're assembling with one of Alexander Cox, or what's his name? Cox. Archibald Cox's staff guys from the special prosecutor's office met us in the Senate office. It was a fascinating time to be around. I was 24 years old. Yeah. So it was, for me, it's like being a fly on the wall and observing all this.
So is the bad decision Nixon starting in June of 1972 made nothing but bad decisions about Watergate.
He made a lot of bad decisions about Watergate.
I don't know that he made a single good one, but I don't blame him for all of it because clearly there's a whole lot of bunch of other things happening with his staff who he had empowered. But if you were an advisor to Birch Bayh, so let's say you're an advisor to Richard Nixon in the summer of 1972, Watergate happens. You don't know about the tapes. How would you have guided the president?
I think you make a mistake, you own it. This is in personal life as well as professional life. And Nixon just didn't want to admit that his people had done this. He knew they had done it. John Mitchell knew that. They all knew they had done it. And they needed he needed to wipe the slate clean, fire everybody who was involved in it, and recover his presidency. And he could have. So that was not a decision. That was just a process that he didn't subscribe to. But when you think about what happened to him, being driven from office, that was the worst thing that could have happened to him. Would it have been worse had he burned the tapes? In his memoirs, he suggests he should have burned the tapes.
So does Pat Buchanan.
Yeah. Diane Sawyer, hung with him later. She thought that. I mean, many people are saying, things couldn't have been worse. Because number one, the evidence that was used against him to force him from office would have been gone. And a lot of people would have said, "Oh, you're obstructing justice and everything else," but would there have been enough to get rid of him?
Not coming off a 49 state win in 1972, 521 electoral votes, man.
And remember, if it hadn't been for the 25th Amendment, the next in line for office after Agnew resigned, it would have been the Democratic Speaker of the House.
Don't tell me. Carl Albert?
Carl Albert of Oklahoma. And because of the 25th Amendment, Gerald Ford became vice president. But without that, I've always thought it was a great unintended consequence, of Birch Bayh supporting this, that because there's no way you would have had Goldwater and the other Republicans going down to the White House to tell Nixon he had to leave if leaving meant turning over the administration to the Democrats and Carl Albert.
That's a great point. I mean, Nixon always thought that Spiro Agnew was his bulletproof vest.
Insurance plan.
That's right. We're gonna skip a few, but there's a couple here I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
You do not have Ford pardoning Nixon.
No, I think it was a good decision. I don't think it was a bad decision. I think it was a bad political decision for Ford's political health.
And he still almost won.
Yes, he still almost won. But when you look back, even Woodward and Bernstein, I was at a 40th anniversary event at the Washington Post to celebrate 40th anniversary of Nixon's resignation with Woodward and Bernstein on the podium. And they even talked about how they felt at the time and how they felt now. I think they have come around saying it was really a statesman-like act. Gerald Ford knew this was not going to be a good political decision, but he felt his administration would be dominated by the trials of Richard Nixon. And the only way he was going to get out from under that was the pardon. I thought it was, again, I felt like a lot of people did at the time. They cut a deal. It's sleazy. This is terrible.
The corrupt bargain part two.
Corrupt bargain, but it wasn't. And I think history will increasingly shine brightly on Gerald Ford over that decision.
Rumsfeld wrote a book about Ford's presidency, came out 4 or 5 years ago. It's really good. Talks about that in detail. I don't know that Ford was capable of doing anything corrupt. I honestly thought that he felt like this is the best thing for the country. We got to stop it and move on, because you don't think about it now. But I mean, Watergate just absorbed all coming out of Vietnam. Every day, every podcast, every broadcast, every news thing was Vietnam. As that dwindled off the radar, now here comes Watergate, and that dominated everything.
I'll give you an anecdote that you might enjoy. That Gerald Ford was, when Marvell Abai got breast cancer, and as a result, Birch dropped out of his efforts to become president in 1971. It was the first kind of public person who had exposed this breast cancer diagnosis and the treatment she had to go under. Betty Ford got it in 1974, and I was with Birch when we searched around and got a phone booth to call the White House to wish best wishes to Jerry Ford, because the diagnosis had just that day become public. And so Birch calls the White House number and said, "This is Senator Bai. I'd like to talk to the president's secretary." And the next voice picks up and says, "Birch, how the hell are you?" It was Jerry Ford. And he said, we go back to playing the congressional baseball games together. And it was just two husbands talking to each other about what a common thing they had gone through. And I always enjoyed that it was, no politics there.
You do not have Jimmy Carter and Marine One. Desert One.
Desert One. I could have. And Birch was the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee at the time. And
that's the attempt to rescue the hostages being held in Tehran. It was one of those.
Said one more helicopter was what he needed to save his presidency.
Yeah. If he had, it was a make or break. You talk about the ultimate roll of the dice politically. If the mission rescues the hostages, Carter's unassailable in 80.
So was it a bad decision?
Yes.
You think?
Do you?
I think he had to try. Cyrus Vance resigned over the matter. It was kind of a Hail Mary. He clearly he was going to go down in defeat over this, and we still didn't know what the future of the hostages were. So I think that the country felt too we got to make an effort to get them. He in his memoirs he wrote that somebody said, "What is there anything you would have done differently as president?" He said, "I would have had one more helicopter involved in Desert One." I'm not sure I feel that it was a bad decision. I think you can argue that it was because of the people who died and
the international reaction. But the only thing I would say is, if I was David Rubenstein and I was advising him or in the room or whatever, like, you're preaching patience over here. We got to be patient. We got to keep, and then you're doing this, and this smacks of impatience.
It does. In many ways, it smacks of a political move to save his ass. I mean, we obviously from the very beginning he was worried about them killing the hostages. We got a bunch of fanatics out there and they're controlling these people, and it was a tough time. I'll never forget the night before the election was the 1-year anniversary of the hostages, and after a long day, we've done everything we can do for election day. I've gone back to my apartment. Evan Bai was my roommate. And we're watching the news, and they're doing this retrospective in the year of the hostages. And it gave me this enormous sinking feeling because we thought we were going to win.
I think that it was either you or someone else when you first came on the podcast when we first started, and we did the retrospective episode about Birch Bai. It may have been you. I forget. I don't know if it was Nancy or
Louis.
Senator Mahern.
Senator Mahern, my good friend Louis.
That you thought 1980 was the best campaign Birch Bayh ran. Like of all the campaigns.
He has said that throughout his life. Best campaign he was ever involved in. We accomplished everything we set out to do except win. And in many respects, when you look at the margins, Carter lost by 440,000 votes in Indiana, and Birch Bayh lost by 160,000 votes. We led the ticket by a large margin, but 440,000 votes in a state where most of the machines were single-lever machines, that's a toughie.
Yeah. George H.W. Bush, read my lips.
Yeah.
Do you think it caused his loss in 92?
I think it certainly was a large contributing factor. I think Bill Clinton would agree with that as well. He used it a lot. Yeah. I mean, he was counseled. Many people argue with him not to do it. You're putting handcuffs on to do that. You know, the whole Clint Eastwood, make my day, and
Ronald Reagan,
and George H.W. Bush, who'd been labeled in Newsweek as a wimp.
Disgusting. That's terrible. That is
terrible
disgusting.
Cover. The wimp factor. I think it was macho creds. It was tough guy stuff. It was totally unnecessary to do it the way he did it. No new taxes. Read my lips. They bring me a tax bill. I'll tell them.
A true unforced error. Like he did not have to do it.
He did not have to do it. He was argued by many of his advisors not to do it. And yet, so what does he do when he raises taxes? He's the biggest hypocrite.
Next, Al Gore, keep away. Now, Al Gore was never president. Thank God. And so what exactly, explain to the audience, I try not to be a partisan, but every once in a while.
It's seeping through.
It's like Tourette's, man.
Chris, help me here.
Every once in a while, help me.
Can't do it. Oh, okay.
Al Gore should have wiped the floor with George W. Bush in the 2000 election. It should not have been close. Gore ran an awful campaign in which he wouldn't let Bill Clinton campaign in Arkansas.
And I think that would have made the difference.
Yeah.
I mean, Bill, you remember all he had to win was one.
I mean, all he had to win was
one state of 3 electoral votes. Yeah, he made the Constitution. He was so annoyed, outraged by the Monica Lewinsky scandal. He felt he didn't want Clinton.
I'm my own man. That's the first thing he says at the Democratic Convention in 2000. And
I was there.
And you said?
Well, you know, I liked Al Gore a lot. I mean, Al Gore had been my later
when you
on,
knew his dad,
become his client. Well, his dad was serving when I was there. I didn't know his dad, but he had been a client of mine, Al Gore, when he was running for the Senate the first time. And, you know, so I liked Al Gore a lot. And his son and my son were friends that went to school together. And so we used to see them at back to school nights, Tipper and Al Gore. And what I always found strange about Al Gore was in person, unbelievably funny and likable, and in public, stiff and wooden and aloof. And it never made sense. He was two people. But his decision not to have Clinton take part in that campaign was silly politically. It was stupid politically. I think it was a terrible decision. It was his alone. It took them a long time to make up. I tell a story in the book about how the stories I heard about them getting back together, which I think I've enjoyed a lot. But the whole point is, yes, Clinton could have made a difference in Arkansas, and all he had to win was 3 electoral state that he didn't win, and it's game over.
Agree or disagree with me? If Clinton had been able to run for a third term in 2000, he would have run and won.
Yes, he would have. He was very popular. That was another part of that chapter was the fact that not only did he not bring him in, he would have won on his own had he been running. I think he was 60% in the polls.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
And Gore with his goofy ass debate tactics. He's a friend of yours. I need to be nice. And he walks up to him.
No, Bush looked at his watch. Gore.
We walked up like close to him. Do you remember the 2000 election, Chris?
If your diapers were off by then, right? Did it? Okay.
Gore should have won.
Well, he won the popular vote, as we know. And Florida was, the Supreme Court intervening in the Florida thing the way they did to me was a travesty and should never have happened. But it happened.
Next, George W. Bush, weapons of mass destruction. I always find this, and I haven't read a ton about it, but a little bit, that how could, and the Bucks, to use Harry's, the buck stops on George W. Bush's desk. But so many people who we think to be completely and totally honorable, and I'm guessing they were, some of them are past, seconded it, including Democrats who said, yeah, I've seen the intelligence. They have weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. How did President Bush get it so wrong?
Well, hopefully I explained all that. I mean, because he got a lot of bad intelligence. I think the bottom line, you have to ask yourself, do we go to war by choice or do we go to war by necessity? I believe the latter is appropriate and the former is not. He chose to go to war. And so I think a lot of people realized to back up his decision, we need to provide a justification. I think there was a lot of hedging of the facts. The facts weren't there. There was a lot of evidence that people knew he had destroyed his weapons of mass destruction. He was no longer maintaining that stuff. I mean, that if you look at the Valerie Plame incident and the yellow cake, and I mean, there's just so many different things that sort of lacked credibility. And yet, I think there was this rush to, let's make sure that the president's rear end is covered appropriately here, and we'll make sure we get these weapons of mass destruction.
Because they did what Johnson didn't do in Vietnam, which is go to the public, make a giant. I mean, he did stuff, but they're like, look, this isn't Pearl Harbor, Vietnam. We got to make the case, and it took months, and they laid it all out in a public relations that I thought they did very well. Mm-hmm. But your argument is it's based on?
Well, it was based on bad intelligence, and you have to say it was a bad decision because of what happened and what has happened since. And the number of people that have died as a result of this, it's, that's part of the world is still, it's so difficult. So many people died. It hurt our reputation internationally. And there's a lot I write about that. The different things people have written about the views. I mean, from Parliament to South America to every countries all over the world said America should not be going to war because we want to go to war. We should only go to war when we have to go to war. That's my judgment. Maybe I'm wrong. I think I'm not. But nonetheless, that was why I considered it a bad decision. He made a decision to go to war, and unfortunately, his intelligence was bad.
Let me throw another one in here real quick that's not on your list that I thought would be interesting if it was, and that is Truman's decision to use the atomic bombs against Japan. Justified?
Well, my father would argue that he wouldn't be alive if it weren't. He was supposed to be in the first wave to attack Japan, and we were talking about 1 million casualties. I think in retrospect, and I heard David McCullough address this same issue. When you think about, he was presented with the alternative that we may have 1 million casualties to attack the mainland of Japan versus, then they were talking about 20 to 40,000 civilian deaths by drama. It seemed like a pretty simple decision. They made war on us, not vice versa. And
have you read Downfall by Richard Franks?
No.
You should. He was just on my podcast talking about it. He's the preeminent scholar of that time period and
what
the
does
decision and all that. It's that there's no possible way you could expect him to do something else.
I agree.
And
like I said, I was raised by a Marine who was supposed to be in the first wave. I always said, I owe my life to Harry Truman. Yeah. In fact, my dad told a story. He was on guard duty in Saipan or someplace like that when the bomb was dropped. And some drunken soldier is walking through and giving the password to go back to the barracks. He says, hey, they dropped some big bomb on a city and blew up the whole goddamn city. My dad said, you're drunk. Go to bed. He remembered that so well and then found out it was true.
John Kerry, Swift boat. Now, this is a presidential campaign, obviously not an administration. Right. It became a huge political issue in 2004. I was surprised, and I don't know if you know Bill Bloomquist, who's political science professor, dean of liberal arts at IUPUI or IUI. He said once in class, I never forgot it, your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. Kerry's greatest strength in a lot of ways was his war service in 2004, especially as the media contrasted it with George W. Bush's, much to the benefit of Dan Rather's career, I should note.
That's true.
John Kerry and the swift boat attacks. What was his main fault? That he just wasn't prepared for them?
He went along with a bunch of his advisors' judgment that it was a small media buy. And, there's old saying that the more you stir shit, the more it smells.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, let's not give it any free airtime. People will forget about it. And Kerry, in retrospect, in his own memoirs, writes about how, what was I thinking? He says, they were attacking the core of my strength and raising questions about its validity. And I needed to fight back. He says, you don't fight back TV ads with newspaper ads. Mm-hmm. They were doing that. Mm-hmm. Or they did radio thing. They didn't go head to head on what became his most vulnerable issue in the campaign, and lost again. He's won
close election.
He wins one other state.
Ohio decides it.
And Ohio Democratic Party was my client. I was doing the voter file and voter contact stuff in Ohio. And I remember arguing with them about their own strategy, about how I thought it was faulty at the time. But nonetheless, it was very painful to realize that had we won that in Ohio, John Kerry becomes president and not George W. Bush for second term. I think that you've got to answer fire with fire.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a good job at poking a hole in his greatest strength, like you said, and it became his greatest vulnerability. And he needed to basically put it to bed that this stuff is crap.
Mm-hmm.
And fight it effectively, and they didn't. And I felt, among advisors, Bob Shrum, principal among the people who said, no, this is a small TV buy, let's not worry about it.
Or Shrum, was he 0 for 8?
Yeah, he's got a pretty bad
0 for 9
campaign record, yes. He actually, I disputed him in the buy book. He had written something about buy, he said buy was supporting Kennedy in the 80 presidential race, which was not true.
Not true.
And
even though he had saved his life.
Yeah, I know, but he was not going to support either one of them in that. We had too many Carter supporters throughout the Democratic Party and everything. And he said to Ted, when Ted was going through the deliberation, look, Ted, any decision you want is fine with me. Don't worry about my future. But there was never any issue about endorsing him. And they read a speech that he gave and said they called Birch a son of a bitch on the airplane over this. Look, he's endorsing Carter. Just not true. And I was there. I was principal in that. I know that one very well.
Did you read the book on that 1980 Democratic primary?
Mm-hmm.
I forget the name of it, but it is so good.
I love those books, by the way.
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
a book called Marathon about the 76.
And the Witkover and Jack Germond books on the presidential elections are really good.
Witkover traveled with us in 1974 in the campaign, and every time I would run into him in later years, we would pick up our previous conversation about the Redskins. It was always about the Redskins. I admired him greatly, actually. And
his book on Nixon and Agnew is really good. Strange Bedfellows, if you haven't read it.
I have not, but I used to play poker with Jack Germond.
Really?
Yeah, it was so cool to be at this event with these giants of
I went to a taping of McLaughlin Group one time, and Germond told me to get out of his way.
He was a big guy too. You don't want to get in his way.
Yeah,
a little bit overweight.
A little bit overweight. You can spin, can't you, Blaemire? Last one before we get to the three biggies, and I know we're running up against time, is John McCain's soccer mom.
I think that picking Sarah Palin, I understand why he did it. I think that for his legacy and for what has happened since, it was a very bad decision. I think you can draw a straight line from Sarah Palin to the Trump world, to the Tea Party, and John McCain, he should have stood by his guns and picked Joe Lieberman. That's what he wanted to do.
That's what he wanted to do.
And he loved his reputation as a maverick, but he kowtowed to the base by because Lieberman was pro-choice, pro-gun control. I mean, there were a lot of things that would have bothered the base, but where are they going to go? They're going to go to Obama? No. I think that, I think he should have stuck to his guns, and it would have been the first bipartisan ticket in the history of the country. There would have been he had to do something dramatic because clearly hope and experience were in competition, and hope always wins that battle.
Do you think McCain could have won in 2008?
I'm not sure he could have won no matter what he had done.
It was super close into September.
It was, but I think that Obama had it.
Well, he just ran a brilliant campaign.
He did.
You can't take whatever you want to say. You can't take it away from him.
And I was very active in that with doing the voter file world that I was involved in, and they were so good. They were so organized and so technically adept. It was great to watch it and be part of it. But I felt that McCain needed to do something big, and that's where I thought the Joe Lieberman choice for him, as much as I would have hated it, very frankly,
sure,
would have been a better Hail Mary than picking Sarah Palin, who right away turned out to be an uncooperative, uneducated dolt. I mean, her Katie Couric interviews were just disastrous for that campaign.
It's more than once, and I think it's an admission, not an acknowledgement. I would admit Democrats traditionally do a better job of choosing a running mate that is beneficial politically. I mean, you look at 1960, Nixon chooses Henry Cabot Lodge, who had lost his Senate seat to John F. Kennedy. Why in the hell are you choosing him? And Kennedy chooses Johnson, much to RFK's everlasting sickness. Did you ever read the book Mutual Contempt?
Oh, yeah. Jeff Cecil, yeah.
Cecil's come on the podcast a couple times.
I went to a baseball game with him at one point, but
Mutual
Contempt.
If you haven't read that book, Chris,
it's about the relationship between RFK and LBJ.
It is the best book on the 60s, in my view.
Did I ever tell you that, Birch Bayh took me out to meet LBJ once?
At the ranch?
No, during the Carswell debate, one day, it's a Friday afternoon, LBJ is no longer president. Right. He's living at the ranch.
This is 1970, I think,
1970. Right? I'm 21 years old. And I'm walking through the office, and Birch sees me and says, "Come here and shut the door." He says, "You want to meet the president tomorrow?" I said, "Nixon?" He goes, "No, LBJ's coming to town. I'm going to go out to see him. You want to go with me?" He takes me out.
Oh, that'd have been awesome.
I mean, I'll never forget it. It was like one of these great acts on his part. And all I could think of, my first reaction was, those are the biggest ears I've ever seen in my life.
Did you ever meet Nixon?
Yeah, Nixon was the first president I ever met.
So you've met every president from Johnson on?
No, I don't think so. Let me say Johnson, Nixon. I'm not sure I ever met Gerald Ford. I saw him a million times. I don't think I ever met him. Never met Reagan. George H.W. Bush, yes. In fact, he and Barbara used to go to the same basketball games. Evan Bayh and Marvin Bush played on middle school basketball together. We would sit with them at basketball games.
Oh, you're kidding me.
He was a congressman from Texas.
Yeah.
No big deal for me. I'm sitting with a senator from Indiana, right? Yeah.
And when Johnson left D.C. in 1969, Bush was the only. George H.W. Bush went to the airport.
Is that right? He was a class act.
Absolutely.
In a lot of ways. And I never met George W. Never met Reagan. I've met Clinton, of course. I've never met Obama. I've been at events with Obama. I've never personally.
Kip too didn't get you in the front row?
Nope. In fact, I went to a Abraham Lincoln birthday celebration in Springfield they have every year.
Yeah, they do every year. Yeah.
He spoke at his first month as president. And I took my parents, which was really cool.
Because George Will's come on the podcast.
Oh.
And he was going to speak one year, and it's the COVID year. And so I was going to drive. I actually emailed Mitch DeAngelo and say, I know, let's go out there. I'll drive, like whatever it takes. I'm assuming you know Biden.
I've had a lot of interaction with Biden over the years, tons. Actually spent a whole day with him once. Diane Meyer-Simon and I, when Diane was working with me in the Senate office, Birch asked Biden to come and give a speech for a candidate for Congress, Adam Benjamin, up in the 1st District.
Mm-hmm.
And so we said we would take care of him. So Diane and I drove from Indianapolis to O'Hare, picked up Biden, took him down into Gary. He gave the speech. We took him back to O'Hare, had dinner with him, and then drove back to Indianapolis, which Diane has described as the night we spent 3 weeks in the car together. But Biden was fabulous. So as a human being, I loved him. And, I remember once driving my car, and the car next to me starts honking, and I open my window, and Biden's in the passenger seat, said, "I just had dinner with your boss." I had a Birch Bayh sticker on my car. This is in Washington. But there are a number of occasions with him. Of course, Ron Klain used to
North
be my
Central.
intern in the Bayh office.
That's someone I'd love to have on the podcast.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, exactly.
But, Biden a lot. Yeah, I've never met Trump. No desire to meet Trump.
I understand from your
Have
point
you
of
met
view.
Trump?
No, I've never met any. Let's see. The most famous person I've ever had a conversation with would either be Muhammad Ali or Michael Jordan.
Muhammad Ali came to my college at GW and gave a speech when I was in college, which was one of the hilarious.
Well,
events.
I'd love to hear about that. Before or after he decided not to go to Vietnam?
This was when he was out of the
Persona non grata.
booted out for a while. Yeah, before the Supreme Court case.
We got three biggies. We're here with. I've lost track of time in my own podcast, so forgive me. It's the history quicksand that we all fall into as history nerds. We're talking with Bob Blaemire. His new book is called Unforced Errors, 15 Bad Decisions That Changed American History. Let's get into I asked him for his three favorites, and he gave me his three favorites. Number one, Thomas Platt. He'd bury Theodore Roosevelt in the vice presidency.
That was his plan. That was the vice presidency was considered the graveyard of politicians. No vice president had been elected president since Martin Van Buren. So the idea was, let's get him out of the governor's chair and get one of my people back in there, and let's put him.
Governor of New York.
McKinley's vice president, Garrett Hobart, had died during his first term, and McKinley was easily reelected with this very popular Theodore Roosevelt, Rough Riders hero, as his vice president. In less than a year, McKinley is assassinated and Theodore Roosevelt's president. So it was a good decision for the country. It was a bad decision for Thomas Platt.
Next, FDR and the internment of Japanese Americans. Bad decision, but how could even as a masterful a politician and popular as Franklin Roosevelt, do you really think he could have stood up and said, we're not going to do this?
Yes. There was no internment of the Italian Americans or German Americans, and we knew there were German spies in this country that Hitler had sent over. We knew that. There has never been since one piece of evidence of any Japanese espionage. It was part and parcel a long history of racism within the higher levels of government about Chinese and Japanese Americans, about the Oriental. That similar racism didn't exist toward Italian Americans and German Americans. And even J. Edgar Hoover, who had been involved in fighting espionage during World War I, he was against the Japanese American internment. He said it will have no impact on the war, and it will be a bad thing for your legacy. There were a lot of people, including Eleanor, furiously opposed to the Japanese American internment. And he went along with it. Even I got so tired of Eleanor bitching at him about it that he said, I don't want you to bring it up again.
Okay, so then
Harold Ickes was terribly against it. He fought him on it.
And he was probably the most prominent, other than Eleanor, left-wing member of the... So it's Franklin Roosevelt. He just wins a third term in November of 40. December 41 is the attack on Pearl Harbor. The timeline for what we're discussing here with the internment is basically, let's say, spring of 42.
That's right.
I mean, in many ways, Roosevelt is at his apex.
He didn't need to do it politically. And he had clearly divided counsel about whether or not it was a decision that helped our defense. Because there was never any evidence that there were spies or that there was espionage going on. But it was an easy to identify community, unlike Italian Americans or German Americans. It played into a lot of the racism that had been there. I mean, there were
which predated Pearl Harbor, obviously.
Asians couldn't become citizens.
Yeah,
I mean, there were so many things.
Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yeah, acts of the our Congress over the years that discriminated against Asian Americans. So this fell into. This is a time we don't. First of all, they attacked us, no question about that. A surprise attack. People were reeling from that and the damage it did to our country. So it's easy to see want to punish the Japanese Americans. You can understand that sentiment. But when you look at a guy like Franklin Roosevelt, who did so many great things for this country and great decisions over the years, to sign on to this one, and his historians since, Doris Kearns Goodwin being another one,
James McGregor Burns
being such a terrible decision for his legacy. that he needed to simply say, no, we're not going to do that. Let's keep an eye on them. Let's infiltrate them, whatever. But the idea of people taking people out of their homes, ruining their businesses, sending them into camps, and then later
American citizens, by the way.
American citizens. Mm-hmm. And then later having them fight for us and having the highest casualty rate of any battalion or company battalion.
The 442nd.
Yeah. I'm not sure the military, again, I'd have to go back to the book to remember describing it, but the casualty rate was enormous.
Daniel Inouye, who you obviously knew.
I used to see him almost every day. And he was such a reminder of the Nice and the high price they paid to fight for this country in Europe.
Daniel Inouye was a Democratic senator from Hawaii who served in the 442nd. Eventually received the Medal of Honor for his heroism. Yeah.
Lost his arm. He and Bob Dole were in the hospital together.
Yeah. Isn't that wild?
Yeah. Dole lost the use of his arm. He didn't have it amputated as Inouye did, but it is amazing that they were in the hospital together.
Is part of it, the last question before we move on to the last one, part of it was part of the decision, the rationale, the mentality, was the belief that the Japanese could have never pulled off this sneak attack on Pearl Harbor if they didn't have someone in Hawaii or whatever helping them. They didn't have the capacity or the whatever to do this. It had to be, fire in the rear.
But it wasn't even Hawaii where we took all these people out. We took them out of all the other states and put them in 10 different locations scattered around the country. Children, families, full families, people that had good businesses and were upstanding members of their community, uprooted from their homes and businesses. I mean, a terrible thing to do. This is America, for Christ's sake. And, to do something like that and have one of our administrations that did so many amazing things for this country, to do this to any segment of our population, to me, was a terrible decision. I got more into that and spent time reading and noting and stuff on that chapter than anything else I worked on.
And there were subsequent administrations did certain things to try to either apologize or make good.
Starting with Truman.
Eventually, President Reagan signed the law that gave them some reparations money.
I think there were reparations,
and
then Clinton followed up with things on their behalf as well. Yeah, I think anybody who looks back in history has to say that we should have never done that.
So this is a question. It's going to go directly to your last bad decision. One of your top three. I've asked this of several historians of the period. So I'll ask you, and then you can just go into the debate. I'm going to suggest, wouldn't it just have been better for the last 65 years if Nixon had beaten Kennedy in 1960?
No. We would have had Watergate sooner.
And no Watergate.
We might have.
No assassination.
Well, I'm sorry, I can't get to that level of revisionist history to suggest
Nixon's the one, Blaemire. Don't you know that?
Yeah, he was the one. That's what he said. Nixon's the one. Look, it's funny that you make this the last of the decisions when in fact it was the first. It was the one that got me started on this. I remember, first of all, I remember the Nixon-Kennedy debates, and that's what it's about.
Sure.
Nixon's decision. I'm watching a documentary one night about the debates, and I start to ask myself, why did Nixon agree to do this? And I started reading more about it and looking up things and finding other programs and realizing there's a lot of backstory to it. But the real reason, when you think about it, there had been no precedent for televised presidential debates. They were the first. So he didn't have to follow a precedent. He was ahead. Eisenhower argued with him not to do it. He was arrogant. He felt that I'm going to show the country I'm a serious politician and he's a rich playboy. And he knew Jack Kennedy well. They served together in Congress and in the Senate.
Kennedy's father was a supporter of Nixon.
That's right. And contributor. In fact, Nixon once said to Kennedy, things would turn out differently. I could have been a liberal Democrat.
And Joe Kennedy, Jack Kennedy's dad, said, if Jack wasn't running, I'd be supporting you.
Yeah. But what does he do? He debates Kennedy, turns Kennedy into a rock star. His crowd sizes quadrupled in size immediately from the day after the debate. And he ends up losing the closest presidential election in the 20th century. So you got to say that his decision to debate Kennedy was a bad decision from his standpoint.
And did the polling at the time indicate, I know Nixon was ahead at single digits, but ahead, prior to the debates, which happened, was it in September of 60?
Yeah, September and October.
So does the polling at the time indicate Nixon's ahead? They do the debates, then Nixon's behind? Because as you point out, and anyone who's judicious points out, people who listened to the debate on the radio thought Nixon won.
Right.
People who watched the first debate thought Kennedy won, but not the subsequent debates. They thought Nixon did better,
Well,
depending on who you ask. So, in other words, there's the polling's like it spikes here, and this is the watershed.
I don't remember, and I probably write that in there. But a lot of the backstory that's important is first to acknowledge the incredible growth in the TV audience,
Right.
between 1956, when Eisenhower had last run, and 1960. The numbers had just ballooned in terms of families being able to watch television. So that was one thing. And then there were things like, Nixon had banged his knee in the campaign, got infected, spent 10 days in the hospital, lost weight. His shirts and suits didn't fit him anymore. He got back on the road, and he had made a pledge to visit all 50 states, which was the first time that all 50 states were going to be in the election.
Right.
That Alaska and Hawaii become states. And their politics were known then, and they haven't changed. Alaska has always been Republican, and Hawaii's always been Democratic. But Nixon traveled to both because he made this pledge. It was not easy like it is now to make those trips. Those trips are hard now, but they were really hard in 1960. He exhausted himself, and he campaigned right up till the moment he had to arrive at the CBS studios for the debate. He gets out of the car, and he bangs his knee. And Pat Buchanan talked about just watching his color of his face change.
Buchanan's 2 books on Nixon are superb.
Fabulous stuff. And so Nixon goes in there. Kennedy's already there. And Don, what's his name?
Hewitt.
Don Hewitt, who later of 60 Minutes fame, was producing the debate. And he says, do you gentlemen want makeup? And Kennedy immediately said no. So Nixon kind of stutters and says, okay, no. Kennedy then goes backstage, and his people put makeup on him.
And Nixon uses like
cracked me up.
the beard stick or something.
He's got the 5 o'clock shadow that is showing through because of the sweat he's generating under the hot lights. He's wearing a light-colored suit, and all TV advisors swear you wear dark colors when you're on TV. So he not only did his clothes not fit, he's got the 5 o'clock shadow, he's sweating and his eyes are darting back and forth, which made him look really sneaky.
Yeah, that's right. Because you watch him on YouTube, it's fascinating to watch.
It is fascinating to watch. And yes, Kennedy was very calm. Kennedy had been sitting on his rooftop of his hotel, sunning himself and going through debate prep with his people, bringing him 3x5 cards, one after the other. Possible question, necessary answer, over and over and over. Doris Kearns Goodwin, in her latest book about her life with Richard Goodwin, Goodwin was one of the advisors of the debate, talks about that and how cool and collected Kennedy was leading up to it, where all the staffers, of course, frantically nervous. Kennedy felt he knew Nixon.
But if you're advising Nixon, it's reasonable to assume a guy who had gone toe-to-toe with Khrushchev and had spent 8 years as vice president, I would have a certain amount of confidence that I can.
But why risk it?
Oh, I agree with that point.
Yeah,
no,
that was the point. That was what I got under. Why risk this? Why do this? And it really was that Nixon's mother called him after the first debate to ask if he was sick.
Yeah, that's right.
Because of the way he looked.
God love Hannah.
And the fact is, he looks back over the years and said, my agreement to do this was a mistake. I shouldn't. He gave Kennedy free airtime and turned him into a celebrity.
And Nixon, to his credit, learned.
So then after I came up with this bad decision that was clearly seriously considered and argued and thought through, how many others can I come up with? And that was how the book resulted.
Your book is absolutely terrific.
Thank you.
It's called Unforced Errors, 15 Bad Decisions That Changed American History. Bob Blaemire. Now, you've already done the 5 questions. Do you remember any of your answers from 5 years ago? This will be my 335th podcast.
I do not.
All right. We'll do them real quick. What was your first job?
My first job was paperboy.
What was your first?
Hammond Times.
What was your first concert?
That I attended?
Mm-hmm.
The Animals at the Hammond Civic Center. Do you believe the Animals came to the Hammond Civic Center? And the next one was the Hollies with Graham Nash. I couldn't believe this. Then the Turtles. They all came to the Hammond Civic Center. Seriously. And
You feel like watching The Big Chill all of a sudden, Spangle?
The Kingsmen came to my high school.
Really?
Twice. No, I would have loved that. Yeah, Eric Clapton.
Number 3, if you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
Huey Long by T. Harry Williams.
T. Harry Williams. Brilliant.
Unbelievable
Brilliant historian.
biography. Although a close second, Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin.
T. Harry Williams' book, Lincoln and His Generals, is one of my favorites.
You know, I ought to read it because I so love. In fact, I just read the Huey Long book for the second time because I was down in Baton Rouge and went to the Capitol to see the area where he was killed and all that. And I'm so fascinated by him because Russell Long, his son, was the key to Birch getting by Dole passed. You know, and there's that
Senator
link.
Russell
And I remember
Long.
seeing Russell Long thinking, that's Huey Long's son.
Well, you're going to read this book on Kent State because I'm going to send it to you.
Okay.
And you will love it. Number 4, if you could, at least I'm very convinced you will love it. Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
Oh, Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address.
It's only 2.5 minutes, though.
I don't care. He's my, if there's a human being who is like a god for me, it's him.
Number 5, if you could have dinner with anyone living, what'd you say?
2.5 minutes. I love that.
Number 5, if you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, living today, 2 hours off the record, just to chat, whom would you choose?
Oh boy, living today. You know, I might choose Bill Clinton. I've never had that time with Bill Clinton like that.
And he's a history geek of the first order.
I find him a fascinating human. I knew Hillary actually before I had ever met him. Because she worked out
the
here
Watergate?
she worked out here in the Carter campaign in 76.
Oh, really? That's right. I remember that talking about that during
I
the
was
primary.
dispatched out here. I just become Bi's political director, and one day he calls me in and says, I got 3 names from the Carter campaign of the people running the Operation Indiana. You need to go out there and help them find where the bodies are buried and any way you can help. We weren't up. Hartke was up. And I used to have dinner I would meet with them regularly and had dinner with Hillary and the crew weekly, and then ended up one of the 3 people was another woman from Arkansas named Ruth Hargraves. I ended up dating after that campaign was over. So Bill Clinton would be one. I mean, Michael Jordan
Paul McCartney.
Oh boy, Paul McCartney.
See, when
just
you start
won.
thinking beyond
Paul
politics.
McCartney just won, I think. Neil Young. I mean, I was a rock and roll drummer in high school.
Really?
I still play drums. I played drums since I was 9, and so
rock John Hammond.
And one of my few regrets in my life is that I never saw the Beatles. You know, so I've seen Paul McCartney several times. I've seen Ringo a couple of times. Never saw George or John, and I always will live to regret that.
So that would be Unforced Error, 15 Bad Decisions of Bob Blaemire's life?
I'm sure I've had more than 15.
You have been
coming here, maybe one of them. You know,
no, Spangle will make you look good. Plus, you got to get a shot in on Moreau. Bill Morrow. So you did that. What
was his name again? Do we pronounce it Morrow or Moreau? I mean, he's very sensitive on that subject.
I can't remember from the podcast he did with Lou Gehrig. Well,
Lou Gehrig, he's been dead for years.
Poor Lou. You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies. We are an Indiana-based public relations enterprise and a federally certified, veteran-owned small business. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Our guest, Bob Blaemire, author of Unforced Errors, 15 Bad Decisions That Changed American History. Should be able to get it on Amazon or the bookseller of your choice. Are you doing any book signings? Or
I'm just starting to arrange those. I've got a couple arranged already, and some in my local community in the Fredship Heights area of Chevy Chase, Maryland. Like I said, technically the publication date was Friday, September 12th. I was sent several editions of the book, and it hasn't shown up on Amazon yet. So the marketing person I've been dealing with says she's going to track it down, figure out what's going on. So it's supposed to be at Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com. It's already at Austin Macaulay, my publisher.com. It's available there. And then there was a UK website that it's available on. And I see what it costs by pounds. But it was weird that it's not yet on anyway. So it will be imminently on Amazon.
Well, we'll post a link to where someone can purchase it when we make the discussion public.
And Christmas is coming, so he's good as a stocking filler for buy hundreds for your friends.
Make sure you give Chris that copy, and then I'll get you another one. Another one. Chris, thank you so much. I had a blast. I hope you had fun.
I did.
And, I'm going to say this. You worked for one of the greats. And for you to come here and spend some time with us on the podcast is very much a compliment. Thank you.
I did. Thank you. I feel I'm a lucky man. The fact that I not only got to work for a great legislator, a great person, and he changed my life in ways that only my parents surpass. And so I will always be grateful to him. I always will feel lucky. He put me on the path that I've been on, and I wouldn't have the children and grandchildren I have now if it hadn't been for Birch Pie. I met my wife in a meeting in the office, so yeah, he's affected my life in so many ways. The ripple effects, the butterfly effect, whatever, have been enormous.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.